Going on, guys? Rich Schneider right here, publisher tonight report. I'm joined by Jake Nazar of College Crosse, one of the premier sites, I guess, right, when it comes to covering college lacrosse. Jake, what's going on, man?
I am good. It's very. Thank you for having me. Some
Yeah,
very gracious words. So I'm glad to be here.
yeah. Let's just jump right into it. Pretty good season by Rutgers Lacrosse. They got as high as I want to say number five in the country, I believe it was. I might have been higher. I not 100% on that, but can you just talk a little bit about this season for Rutgers and what it meant for them as a program?
Yeah, I think it was massive in a lot of different ways. Obviously, it was their most successful season in terms of how far they progressed. They got to the quarterfinals of the NCAA tournament, which is the farthest they've gotten since I think 1990. So just in terms of that success, they had been close to making the NCAA tournament numerous times over the last couple of years. They finally broke through. They won a game. They were extremely close to making it to the Final Four, which is where you're
Yeah.
kind of always trying to go. That's something that we've mentioned on our site a lot, is that it's hard to expect to win the national championship, but if you get to the Final Four, you can without question say you had a successful season. I think Rutgers had a extremely successful season even without coming just short in the quarterfinals. So I think in that scheme of things, it was a hugely successful year. And then I think in the long term, I think it benefits them that they know now they can make the NCAA tournament. They have the experience of getting there. It's always the first one's always the hardest to get to, and now that they've kind of broken through, I think that'll help them a lot. I think it'll probably help them in both terms of recruiting and certainly, as we've seen with the transfers that they've picked up over the last couple of weeks. I think that makes them an appealing destination in that regard as well. So I think it for this year it was a very successful season, and I think that it'll benefit them over the long haul as well to set them up for
So
success.
we're going to talk about the transfers in a little bit, but getting right into things, obviously the big names that they're going to lose this year, the Kearse brothers. I know they only here for, I guess, a year actually. They're only here for a season, but how big of a loss is it to lose those guys?
Yeah, I mean there's no kind of downplaying that. Connor was a first team All American when he transferred in from Villanova as a midfielder. They played him at attack to get him on the field for every possession, and he was fantastic for them. That's just an elite player that you can't really replace those guys. You manage the best you can, which they certainly will attempt to do in 2022. But yeah, that kind of guy with his shooting ability, especially from the outside, and his ability to dodge and beat his defender one-on-one. You can never have too many of those types of guys. So that's a big loss. He gave them a different element as well. They had Charlon Beatties and Mullins for a long time. But you added Kearse to that. I think it took it to another level. And then Colin and goal, that he was huge. They had kind of been trying to fill goalie for a couple of years. They had Chris Elaine and then Max Edelman, who were really good for quite a while. And then they had a gap there for a couple of years that they needed to fill. And he did it tremendously, both as in terms of his ability to save shots. He was a terrific shot stopper, especially throughout the year, but especially in the NCAA tournament, as we saw. But then what he did for them in their transition, his ability to handle the ball, coming out of his crease, passing to set up their transition opportunities. That was something that he had that not a lot of other goalies in the country can do. He was the best goalie in the country in my mind in that regard. So that's something that they'll need to kind of. It's one thing to replace him, in terms of his shot stopping ability, which I think they maybe could be able to do reasonably well. Well, they added a goal in the transfer portal, but it's that element of it. Rutgers loves to play fast. They love to get the ball, quickly down the field, and he really was a key part in that. A lot more so than you'd see from other goalies around the country.
So let's just jump right into it. We're talking transfers. I know they already got it 5 guys. Care if we go one by one?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I guess the first one we're going to talk about goalie right away. So Toby Bergdorf, if I'm pronouncing that right. I might be wrong on that. But I'm looking at it right now, 16th in the nation in saves last year, 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Week, 2-time Big East second team, I believe it was, he earned accolade-wise. But just talk a little bit about him. I know he's a Jersey native, so now he's coming back home to finish out his collegiate career with the Rutgers.
Yeah, I think that's a good pickup. Bergdorf got a lot of attention in 2020 in the shortened season because he had put up big time numbers through about 6 games there. He was saving at, I believe, 63%, which was pretty nuts. It dipped this year in terms of a full season, but he was still pretty solid. He saved 51% this year. If you take out a game against Denver where he just got kind of shelled a bit, he only made 2 saves. That was a tough game. He was closer to 54%, which is pretty darn solid. That's around what you can look for and expect to win games if you have your goalie at around the margin. And one thing that I think benefits him is that he faces, as you meant, he was 16th in the country in saves. He faces a lot of shots. He's a goalie who can take a lot of shots and make saves. If you look at his numbers, even in games where maybe he wasn't over 50% on the ledger, he still had 16 saves in a game against Denver. He had 10 plus saves in all but like 3 games. So he was still saving a lot of shots, even in games where he faced, upwards of 35 plus shots. And that's key for Rutgers because Rutgers as a defense kind of asks their goalie to make saves. They're willing to surrender, at least they were with Crosse a year ago, willing to surrender a lot of shots because they had confidence that their goalie could save them. And that's kind of the way they structured their defense, was asking their goalie to make a lot of saves. So I think Bergdorf's a good fit in that regard, that he's a goalie who's comfortable facing a lot of shots and can make some saves. I think that'll benefit them in terms of both. I think he's a solid goalie, and I think he's a good fit for what they like to do as a defense. So, we'll see if is he Colin Kurse? Probably not. But I think he's a more than adequate replacement that I think will do a solid job.
So the next one I got for you is University of Penn midfield grad transfer Mitch Patolo. He's kind of an intriguing one because I'm looking at like the numbers wise. I know his first season in 2018, he had a season-ending injury. He played about 16 games in 2019, then only 3 in 2020, and then only 1 because of the COVID restriction with the Ivy League last year. So I'm intrigued to see what you're going to say about him, just because he hasn't really played that much.
Yeah, he's a very intriguing player. The enticing thing about him is the physical attributes. 6'6", well over 200 pounds. Yeah. He's a big dude, and that's interesting on Rutgers midfield as well, because you got Sprock and Knobloch, who are kind of smaller guys, more shifty, trying to get their speed, and you throw him in there, I imagine, as a potential starter on that first midfield, as a guy who can really use probably his size. So I think he fits in well in that, to give them a different dimension. And yeah, he had a good year for Penn in 2019. He had 16 goals, 23 points. Starting for them, and that was a really, really strong Penn team. Probably more responsibility, I would say. Or more attention will be paid to him. I think this year at Rutgers, Penn had a lot of guys on that team who garnered a lot of attention. Like, he played on the midfield with Sam Hanley, who was one of the best midfielders in the country. He was a first-team All-American. So he'll get more attention from defenses. But I think it rounds out that midfield nicely. With you losing that attack, I think you can slot him in there at the midfield with Sprock and Knobloch, and you'll feel like you've got a strong midfield, and maybe Ryan Gallagher can move back down to attack where he played before. Yeah. You can give yourself some more options to play with that attack with having plugged in a guy at the midfield. I think aside from Bergdorf, he's probably the most significant name they picked up, and I think was a solid pickup. He was probably in around the top 5 guy, a name in the portal. Options out there. He commanded a good bit of attention with a lot of teams. Now we're after him, and that was a good pickup.
Yeah, definitely interesting. I know the next one's a Jersey native. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right either. Sam Steffen, Millstone, New Jersey, Notre Dame High School. I know Rutgers fans complain about it quite a bit when it comes to faceoffs, but looking at his percentage, 57% last year with Mount St. Mary's is pretty impressive.
Yeah, the NEC was a pretty quietly very strong league for faceoff guys. They had Zach Cole from St. Joe's, who's one of the best faceoff guys in the country, an All-American. Drew Blanchard from Hobart, who's also in the portal. He was really strong. Jacob Alexander from Bryant. If you watched the NCAA tournament, he had a great game against P. LaSalle, Virginia, who obviously went on to win the national title and be a huge part of that team. So it was he not coming from a league of weak Fogos, which is important because the Big Ten is a very strong face-off league. I think, like Rutgers, I think you'll see their numbers in terms of facing off rise in 2022, just because of the fact they're not playing 80% of their schedule against pretty much all strong faceoff guys. Pretty much everyone in the Big Ten is a good faceoff guy, and so if you have to go up against those guys every week, it's going to kind of naturally depreciate those numbers. So, we'll see how it does. Again, it's as good as the NEC was. The Big Ten's probably a step up in terms of the faceoffs that he will have to, the faceoff guys will have to go up against. I think it's just a good pickup in terms of it gives them more options. They can probably use, Dehenio wound up taking a lot of faceoffs for them, and I think Maryland, I think, was a good kind of, both Maryland and Rutgers were teams who kind of struggled on faceoffs in comparison to the rest of the Big Ten. What Maryland was able to do to kind of balance that was they often had multiple options that they could throw. So they could find a guy for a game who could get hot and help them. I think throwing Steph in there with Dehenio gives Rutgers at least a chance to have options and, go to one guy if one guy gets a little cold. I think that'll benefit them. Does he solve them all on his own? I don't think so. I mean, if he does, then that'd be awesome. That would be a huge boost for them. I don't know if he does that, but I do think it helps them at minimum, give them multiple options, helps keep the guys, the face-off guys fresh, because that's obviously a physically exerting position. And so, I think they needed a Fogo. There wasn't as, I don't think there's a big name, kind of out there. There wasn't a, immediate, well, let's just go get that guy and that guy solves all of our problems. Most of the guys out there are kind of take a flyer on. You think they could try to help. Obviously, New Jersey native probably played a big part. And I think he'll give them a boost in that position.
So the last two are, I guess every single transfer is pretty intriguing, but these last two are a little more intriguing, I would say, just because of the jump they're going to make. You have Ronan Jacoby and out of Wesleyan, and then Bragg Apgar, I want to say it's pronounced, out of Salisbury. Obviously, Salisbury, I think, just finished second in the D3 national championship. I might be wrong on that, but yeah, so it's just intriguing to see that they're going to pick up two D3 guys. Can they make that jump to the D1 level? I know Salisbury is pretty well known with lacrosse, but I don't know about Wesleyan, to be honest.
Yeah, so it's Salisbury's an elite program. If you are an All-American, Brad Apgar was an All-American, first-team All-American in 2019 for Salisbury. He was a All-American in the shortened season in 2020. He'll get those honors again this year. It's difficult to say. I mean, if you're playing at kind of the top echelons of D3, I think you can make that transition. We saw a lot of D3 or D2 jumps to D1 last year or in the last couple of years. We've seen like Charlie Bertram for Virginia who was like D2 player of the year at Merrimack. Merrimack had made a jump to D1 in 2020, but this was his first full year in D1. He was really good for them. We've seen other guys thrust into, prominent roles who maybe struggled. I think the good thing for Apgar is he probably isn't going to be thrust into a, big time prominent role. I think if Jared Jean Felix does come back for Rutgers, they'll bring back pretty much all of that defense. And I'm not saying he won't carve out a starting spot, but he won't be put in a position where it's like, all right, you need to be your best defender right now. And so I think that transition will be positive for him. I think the thing that is enticing about him is the size, 6'4", 210. Rutgers defenders are generally a bit more smaller. Like Bobby Russo's a bit more smaller, fleet of foot. So it gives them a different look. You get a bigger defender. Not that it necessarily translates to your success, but certainly from a physical standpoint, both Apgar and Jacoby both look like guys who athletically can compete at that level. And we'll see how the jump in terms of just skill that they're facing impacts there. And Jacoby's a big time scorer. He scored 52 goals in 2019. Wesleyan's only kind of had kind of shortened seasons last couple of years, but he's continued to put up big numbers. So I think that'll be a intriguing one as well. They have some room at attack where they need to kind of find some answers. They have some internally. I think Ross Scott's a guy. He played great against North Carolina, who I think can fit in there. But I think there's probably room for Jacoby to find a starting spot. So it's hard to project. For sure where you go and what option, how it'll pan out. But they did get two guys who have been very successful at that level.
Mhm.
And if you've been very successful at that level, I think you can be. But certainly, yeah, there will be a bit of learning curve there. I think that's probably where, if they had made that transition this year, I think maybe it'd been harder just throwing them into the Big Ten
Yeah.
just from the beginning, and that's all you're playing.
Mhm.
Next year they'll get, non-conference games, a chance to, and a full season to kind of, burn them into their system with the fall ball and everything. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think those are intriguing. I don't, to the extent what big of an impact they'll make, can't say for sure the way you could maybe with some of the D1 transfers they got, but there certainly have been very good players at the levels that they've played at.
So let me ask you this. I know you just said it's hard to project things like this, but as long as all these guys gel and they all fit pretty well, how good could this 2022, I guess, Rutgers team be? Like, do you think they're as good as last year, or maybe take a little
Uh,
drop off?
yeah, it's hard to say. As good as, I mean, this year's team, it was offensively they were just so effective because of that attack unit
Mhm.
that blended together so well. And you had three big time players and three big time experienced players, guys who had been around for such a long time. And then on the defensive side, it was what made them good was I just think a great coaching job. They were better than the sum of their parts. Is kind of how we described them. They all kind of gelled together. And you had Kirsten Goal. If Bergdorf can be a close 80 to 90% of Colin Kirst, and then you can have Bartolo, fit in there. That midfield can kind of take an extra step. Knobloch looked great. He kind of hit a freshman wall at the end. So
Yeah.
I anticipate they'll have a really strong year in 2022.
Mhm.
I don't. It could. I mean, if they can win faceoffs, at a higher level, and they can continue to get saves, I think there's a world, where you could see them getting to the quarterfinals again. I don't know that they'll be as strong a team throughout the year. I mean, they were, even though they were in the Big Ten, I thought they were a top 5 team or top 10 team for
Yeah.
pretty much the entire year, from kind of when they started towards the end. I don't know that this team will get there from the beginning. I think they'll probably start in the top 15-ish. And I think they'll be around that level. But I think, if they can gel, I could see this being an NCAA tournament team again by the end of the year. And even if they're, it takes them a while to get there, the Big Ten is going to be pretty wide open next year, I think. Maryland will obviously be at the top, probably again the top 5, but beyond that, it's pretty wide open. So I think there's room for them to kind of develop throughout the year. Maybe you have to get in the Big Ten tournament and kind of go on a run and win it and get the AQ.
Yeah.
But I think there's reason for optimism that they can be in the mix again and get themselves into the tournament. If you can get into the tournament, as we saw, you can make a run. Anything can kind of happen once you get in there. So it'd be hard to be as good as they were this past season. I don't know if that's the expectation, but I think having made adding these players that they've added to the roster, they've plugged in some holes. It looks like a roster that I could see that ceiling is an NCAA tournament team again, as opposed to like when the season ended and you're looking at what they're losing, look like, oof, this could be a step back. But I think they've added some good pieces and they filled in some gaps. I think you can see them getting to into the NCAA tournament mix once again.
Awesome. So, I mean, I guess the last one I got for you is what's it going to take for Rutgers to take this next step and get to that like next level? I know they just got the new Rodkin Center, which is housing lacrosse and soccer programs. They have the fan base that pretty actually big fan base in terms of lacrosse for New Jersey. And then on top of that, they're recruiting pretty well, both transfer portal and high school. So what would you say that next step that they have to take in order to get to that next level?
I think
Is it like
I
better
would
recruiting
say
or more like
recruiting's probably where I go. And it's they New Jersey's an interesting state in terms of recruiting. It produces a lot of talent, maybe not at the level of a New York or a Baltimore, Maryland,
yeah.
kind of area, but it does produce. It's a good talent area. However, a lot of that talent tends to leave. What are the reasons for that? I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily a Rutgers thing. If it's just that's if you'll notice, some of them go to not far from the state. Some of them go to Philly, or other areas. Like you look at the Kirst brothers, for example, who went to, Villanova or Lehigh,
Mhm.
which are not far from New Jersey. So I think recruiting that's kind of the key, is getting some of those New Jersey guys to they've done a good job of bringing them back. Guys who have from New Jersey, who now, as we've seen, their fourth or fifth year in the transfer portal, to come home and play their fifth year. I think if you can get some more of those guys in the program from the right out of high school,
Mhm.
I think that's probably where the improvement comes. The new facilities will help with that. There's no question about that. That's a big boost, is getting those new facilities in there that can compete with it. You look at, the Big Ten's been in kind of quietly just adding, a lot of newer facilities. Michigan added their own lacrosse complex a couple years ago. Penn State's done it.
Yeah.
I know Ohio State's looking at adding a lacrosse Pacific Stadium. And then you've got even Maryland and Hopkins, who already had, obviously recruit extremely well. They've added newer facilities as well. So it's kind of a I don't want to say an arms race, but it's like they've been improving. And so Rutgers had to kind of make that jump, and they have. So I think that'll help them a lot. But yeah, I think recruiting is kind of getting more immediately out of high school, I would say. And then they've had good teams for 5 or 6 years now. So some of it was just, I think, had they had some better luck and made it into the tournament earlier, they could have maybe gone on a run. But I think they've set themselves up and established themselves as a top 20 program, and maybe top 15. And if you can get more talent kind of into the program from out of high school, I think that's that would be the biggest thing as to how they get to that potential next step. It's difficult. There's a lot of more programs now than there used to be. And look, there's still your top echelon of schools who care about lacrosse at a different level, Maryland or Virginia. And then you've got Duke in North Carolina or Georgetown, where maybe lacrosse isn't as important, but academically kids want to go to those schools. So they have their like North Carolina doesn't even really have to pick up the phone. Kids want to go to North Carolina. It's just that's just the way it is. But yeah, I think there's room for Rutgers to maybe break into a tier with a Loyola, who's a consistent kind of quarterfinal team, or a Denver maybe, who has kind of cultivated their own niche. But I think there's room to continue up that accelerator, get to NCAA tournaments relatively consistently. And I think recruiting at high school would be where I would say, and then some of it I think can just kind of happen naturally, just through having success and learning how to win, and getting over that hump and getting into the NCAA tournament as they did this year. I think some of that just kind of bleeds down kind of naturally and organically as a program. Do you have that belief that you can win these games? You go out and do it, and because as we mentioned, like they haven't had, from where they were when Brian Breck took over. They were bad like when he took over, and they haven't been that level in a long time. They've been good pretty much. Their worst seasons in the last couple of years have been, I don't know, they were hovering on the top 20, maybe they finished outside of receiving votes, something like that. So it's been a while since they've had a year where you could say they weren't successful, at least in terms of having a winning season or something like that. So they've taken definitely a step in from where they were, and I think they took another step this year. So I think there's room to optimism to be had that they can, continue to grow that program.
Awesome. I'm sure the fans are going to love hearing that one. So, but Jake, I appreciate everything, man. Thanks for joining us. If anyone wants to read more about college lacrosse, where do they have to go?
So at college_crosse is where we're at on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, you can follow us there. collegecrosse.com is where you can find us, our website, any written stuff. And then the podcast, College Crosscast, we're on pretty much every podcast service. So Spotify, Apple, Google Play, wherever you guys get your podcast, just download it and it'll pop up in your feed just as any other podcast would. So that's the 3 main ways you can.
And it's obviously not just Rutgers; it's more than that, right?
Yes. Albeit we have definitely we have a New Jersey contingent among us. So Rutgers was a team that we definitely enjoyed following this season.
Perfect. Thanks, man. Thanks again, man. I appreciate you joining us, and that's all I got.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.